Hey guys, tonight we're going to scrub through history, literally. You're about to dip your imaginary toothbrush into the powdered remains of bones and oyster shells, while your ancient Greek self prepares for bed without so much as a toothbrush. Picture yourself standing barefoot on sun-warmed marble, the salty breeze from the Aegean brushing past your linen tunic as you stare into a polished bronze mirror, your mouth full of residue from dinner, honey-glazed dates, olives, maybe some roasted fish. There's no Colgate in sight, no dental floss, and no mercy. You're expected to clean your teeth with a powder made of crushed animal bones and bits of oyster shell, and you're probably about to swallow some of it too. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and don't forget to post your location and what time it is where you're listening from. It's always fascinating to know who else is dozing off to ancient bone dust around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your mouth reluctantly. A servant, probably a teenager, half listening to a lyre performance, leans in and hands you a small ceramic pot filled with pale gray powder. No mint flavoring, no foamy rinse, just finely ground animal remains. Specifically, cow bones, sheep bones, and sometimes, if you were wealthy and feeling fancy, crushed oyster shells harvested from the coasts of the Peloponnese. The finer the grind, the better the clean, or so you're told. You pinch some of the dusty mixture between your fingers and press it against your teeth. Maybe you use a finger, maybe a rough linen cloth, and then the scrubbing begins. It hurts. A little. Okay, a lot. Because while calcium-rich and abundant bones and oyster shells aren't exactly gentle exfoliants, you feel every scrape as if Poseidon himself is dragging a trident across your molars. But there's a reason behind this madness. The ancient Greeks were nothing if not observant. They noticed that over time, food particles left between teeth turned nasty, especially the sweet stuff. They also knew that finer powders smoothed out the surface of the teeth, reducing staining and building what they vaguely understood as resistance. Nobody had heard of bacteria, but they knew rot when they smelled it. You rinse with water from a shared amphora. It's lukewarm and tastes faintly of clay, but it helps you spit out the bits that chipped off your tooth enamel. No fluoride, but maybe a little lime if your household was into experimenting. Mainstream historical texts, especially later Roman adaptations, describe similar powders in medical treatises. Galen and others even borrowed from this Greek practice, adding exotic ingredients like lapis lazuli dust. But in the 5th century BCE, your options were earthier, literal earth sometimes. Of course, historians still argue whether these powders were actually part of a widespread daily routine, or if they were reserved for the wealthy, the vain, or the extremely unlucky. After all, we're not talking about toothpaste tubes in every Agora corner store. Most of these mixtures came from household experimentation or advice passed down from elders who had, let's be honest, fewer and fewer teeth to lose with each generation. And there's the fringe theory. Some ancient beauty manuals, yes, they existed, recommend applying crushed shell not to remove buildup, but to create a chalky white surface on top of stained teeth, kind of like a primitive concealer. Imagine smearing powder over your smile to fake dental hygiene. You'd fit right in on an ancient Instagram feed. Meanwhile, you try not to gag. The bone powder has a musky, metallic tang, especially if it wasn't properly dried before grinding. Oyster shell adds a bit of saltiness, but not in a fun potato chip kind of way, more like licking a piece of beach driftwood. But still you persist. Because having white, smooth teeth in Athens isn't just about health, it's about image. The brighter your smile, the more respect you command, especially if you're trying to win favor at a symposium or impress someone across the olive stall. Yellow teeth were considered uncivilized, barbarian. So if you had to grind down some enamel to look like a marble statue, well, that's the price of glory. You pause to consider the absurdity of it. You're essentially scrubbing your face with gravel and hoping your gums don't rebel. And then you remember there's no dental insurance. If something cracks, it stays cracked. And if something bleeds, it better stop on its own. Still, there's a ritual to it now. Your fingers dip once more into the powder pot. Tap, scrub, spit. The sun has long set. Somewhere in the courtyard, a lyre plays a sleepy tune. You move your jaw, gently testing for pain. Nothing too sharp. That's a win. And yet, there's a comfort in the grit, a feeling of continuity. You're not the first to do this. Hundreds of generations before you, Greeks with names long forgotten, stood under moonlight doing this same odd dance, rubbing cremated bone dust into their mouths and calling it hygiene. You glance at your reflection. Again, the mirror doesn't lie. Your teeth look smoother, whiter, maybe. You allow yourself a moment of pride. Then you hear your cousin in the next room gagging on her oyster shell mix. Misery, after all, loves company. You blow out the last oil lamp and feel the sharp edges of history lingering behind your lips. You wake with a dry mouth and a faint taste of bone dust still clinging to your tongue. Morning sunlight bleeds over the courtyard tiles as doves coo from a rooftop nearby. You stretch, scratch, and reach lazily for the pot of fresh ash your household slave left by the wash basin. Today's dental routine won't be much kinder than last night's. Sitting on the low stool, you swirl your finger through the gray ash like it's the most natural thing in the world. Because in your world, 5th century Athens, or maybe Delphi, that is toothpaste, soot scraped from yesterday's cooking fire, or the leftover ash from burned fig trees and olive branches. It's not just waste, it's wisdom. Your grandmother swears by it. So did hers, and somewhere in the smoky annals of oral tradition, ash became one of the earliest weapons in the war against plaque. You press the soot against your front teeth and start rubbing. The texture is soft, At first deceptively gentle, like rubbing silk on sand. But then the grit hits. There's something oddly satisfying about it, like scouring a dirty dish. You imagine flakes of yesterday's fish and honeyed barley bread surrendering beneath your fingertips. The logic, they said, was simple. Fire purifies. If you burn away impurity, the remains must be clean sacred, even. Charcoal and ash absorb odors, which means, by ancient logic, they surely must absorb disease. Historians still argue whether this practice was purely practical or deeply spiritual, linked to fire worship and purification rites that bled into hygiene rituals. And if you're feeling especially fancy, you reach for the soot collected not from your own hearth, but from a temple fire. Yes, sacred ash, rumored to be blessed by the gods themselves. That'll add a little divine sparkle to your breath. There's even evidence that elite households stored black powders in carved ivory containers, sometimes mixed with aromatic herbs or dried citrus peel. One quirky tidbit from a lesser-known satirical play mentions a character who sprinkles pine ash onto his teeth before a romantic rendezvous, claiming it makes his smile smell like Mount Olympus in spring. We can only hope his date had low expectations. But don't get too romantic about it. This is still soot. It turns your fingers black and leaves smudges on your lips if you're not careful. And God's help you, if someone kisses you mid-routine, you'll both look like chimney sweeps. Still, the ancient Greeks understood that charcoal, especially fine powdered charcoal, had abrasive qualities. It could remove the buildup on teeth, freshen the breath, and even in their estimation, draw out the rot. It's not all that far from modern activated charcoal pastes, though yours probably has fewer disclaimers and no cute mint flavoring. And for those who didn't want to bother mixing powders daily, there were ready-made pastes, sort of. Some households would blend ash with a bit of water or wine to make a dark slurry. Others used olive oil, though that sometimes led to, well, unintended digestive adventures if swallowed. But in rare cases, the paste included honey or goat milk to bind it, which made for a more spreadable, if stickier, brushing experience. You pause. Something crunches in your mixture. A stray pebble. You wince and check your teeth. Still intact. For now. Here's the thing for the ancient Greeks, hygiene wasn't just about health. It was deeply woven into their concepts of balance. Cleanliness maintained equilibrium between body and spirit, hot and cold, wet and dry. And ash was considered a dry astringent substance, perfect for drawing out excessive moisture decay, or even ill humors. You've likely heard the neighborhood healer or midwife suggest chewing charcoal for stomach upset or smearing it on a festering wound. Why wouldn't the same thing work for teeth? That was the logic. If it works for a boil, maybe it'll save your molars too. But then again, historians still debate whether the majority of people practice this routinely or just during festival preparations and public appearances. After all, temple records and symposium poetry focus far more on olive wreaths and wine goblets than morning mouth routines. And there's an even stranger theory. Some ashes, especially those from specific sacred groves, were believed to carry protective magic. An amulet might contain the dust of burnt laurel or fig leaves. Why not put that same protective powder in your mouth? One fringe inscription claims that no evil breath shall linger where sacred ash rests. You can almost imagine a young man whispering that like a prayer before scrubbing. Your gums tingle. Maybe it's the ash. Maybe it's your imagination. Either way, your mouth feels emptier, cleaner. You're not sure, but there's definitely less honey clinging to your back molars, and you haven't gagged yet this morning. So, that's a win. Of course, one joke still floats around ash. In the mouth keeps the plague out of the house. It's not entirely funny, but in a world without dentists, antiseptic, or even toothbrushes, you'll take your wisdom wherever it shows up, even in bad poetry. As you rinse your mouth out with a splash of tepid water from a ceramic jug, you glance again into your polished mirror. There's a grayish tinge to your gums. Normal. At least you hope so. And just as you're ready to finish, a neighbor yells over the courtyard wall, asking if you're coming to the marketplace. You shout back that you'll be right there. But first, you return to the basin and rinse again. Because as much as you hate the taste of soot, you're not about to walk through Athens with dragon breath. One last glance. Teeth presentable. Not gleaming white, but definitely not barbarian yellow. You smile, ashes and all. You make your way down the cobbled path toward the marketplace, sandals slapping softly against the stones when you catch a whiff of something earthy, nutty, and strangely familiar. It's olive oil, freshly pressed. You follow the scent to a vendor, ladling the golden liquid into amphorae, but this time you're not thinking of salad dressing. You're thinking of toothpaste. Yes, olive oil. Not just for food, not just for anointing athletes or oiling wrestlers at the palestra, but for swishing, rinsing, and cleansing your ancient Greek mouth. You pinch the small phial tucked into your belt. It holds a few tablespoons of high-quality oil, first press, slightly peppery, and reputedly from the groves of Sappho's island. You lift it to your lips. Swish. This is oil pulling long before any modern wellness influencer tried to rebrand it. You tilt your head back and let the viscous fluid glide through the corners of your mouth, coating every crevice, seeping into your gums. It's thick, uncomfortably so. You resist the urge to swallow, because as smooth as it feels, your stomach would not appreciate that on an empty morning. The ancient Greeks believed in balance. The humoral theory reigned supreme. A healthy mouth required more than just scraping and scouring. You needed to lubricate, cleanse the tongue, cool the body, moisten the temperament. Olive oil, they thought, soothed the internal heat that led to bad breath, sore gums, or even tooth loss. It didn't just clean, it harmonized. Historians still argue whether this practice was purely functional or wrapped up in ritual. There are references in Orphic texts to sacred oils, purifying the breath before prayer, and some scholars speculate that priests performed olive oil rinses before delivering oracles. Is that hygiene or ceremony masquerading as hygiene? One thing's certain, it made your breath less offensive, at least temporarily. The oil helped lift food particles from between the teeth, and with enough swishing, some suggested 10 minutes, you could pull out impurities, soften hardened residue, even soothe mouth ulcers. Of course, you had to be rich enough to waste olive oil like that. The peasants, they probably stuck to ash and spit. And there's the fringe tidbit a poet once wrote of a lover whose kisses tasted of olives and the softest morning breeze. Either she just rinsed with oil, or she was very into her local grocer. We'll let you decide. You finish swishing and spit discreetly onto the base of a nearby fig tree. The oil lands with a satisfying plop, coating the soil. Someone gives you a weird look. You smile full of confidence, teeth slightly slick, but glistening. They don't have to know you've just oiled your entire mouth like a roasting pan. Now, for those more adventurous, the olive oil could be enhanced. A few drops of vinegar made it more astringent, more refreshing. Sometimes crushed mint or rosemary was stirred in creating a rustic sort of mouthwash. One household scroll even describes heating the oil gently with a sliver of garlic to awaken the tongue. You're not sure that's the awakening you want at 8 a.m., but to each their own. Some physicians of the time, especially those following Hippocratic thought, warned against overuse. They worried that too much oil could soften the gums and unseat the teeth. You picture your molars slipping around like olive pits in a press. Lovely. But others swore by it. Even Plato reportedly rinsed with oil before debates to keep his voice pure and pleasing. Whether that's true or just philosopher fan fiction, the image of him gargling in a toga before schooling sophists is now lodged forever in your brain. You continue down the Agra mouth feeling smooth coated. There's no burning like with charcoal, no scraping like with bone. Instead, it's more like your gums are wearing tiny togas, draped, hydrated, and slightly pretentious. Of course, the oil didn't fix everything. It masked smells, loosened debris, and may have even delivered trace antimicrobial benefits, but it didn't regrow enamel or reverse decay. Still, in a world without floss, you could do worse. You recall one bizarre home remedy, oil mixed with goat cheese. The logic. The oil softens the cheese scrapes. Together, they do something. One scroll calls it a thick breath balm. Another just says, do not swallow. As you pass the statue of Athena near the marketplace square, you notice a young couple nearby sharing a fig, their giggling teeth bright in the sun. You can't help but wonder, did they rinse this morning? Or are they just naturally lucky with dental genetics? You envy them either way. At a nearby booth, a vendor is offering sacred oil for all uses. It comes in small vials etched with owl motifs. You consider buying more. Your current stash is running low, And if your breath doesn't offend anyone today, it'll be thanks to this golden elixir. You leave a few drachmas, pocket a fresh vial, and start heading back home. Your tongue slides over your teeth, checking for rough patches. Still smooth. Still presentable. You resist the urge to grin at a passing stranger. They wouldn't understand. They haven't just oil rinsed their way to oral harmony. And as you walk, you feel that smug satisfaction only the ancients knew, the kind that comes from balancing bodily fluids, appeasing the gods, and defeating yesterday's dinner particles in one slow, slippery swish. By mid-morning, the heat is rising, and the marble streets of the agora reflect the sun like polished mirrors. Your errands done, you slip into a shaded corner beside a crumbling column, pulling out a twig, gnarled, aromatic, and surprisingly well-traveled. It's your toothbrush, not made of plastic, not electric. Just a freshly trimmed bay twig, chewed slightly at one end, its fibers frayed into a primitive brush. The Greeks called them masticaphora chewing sticks. And yes, you're about to rub one against your teeth like a cow with something to prove. You bring it to your mouth. The first rub is always a bit harsh. It's dry, a little dusty, but as your saliva soaks the wood fibers, they soften into a gentle bristle. You glide it along your gums, careful not to press too hard. You've heard rumors someone's cousin cracked a molar trying to show off with an oak branch. You're not that guy. The practice isn't just practical, it's almost sacred. Certain woods are preferred. Bay laurel, olive fig, even mastic from the island of Chios. Each has its own flavor, its own properties. Mastic in particular is prized. Chewing it releases a resin said to freshen the breath and strengthen the gums. It's like ancient gum, except it's tree bark, and it sometimes sticks to your teeth like old wax. Historians still argue whether these twigs were used daily or reserved for festivals, fasts, or predate grooming. But archaeological digs around the Aegean have unearthed bundles of chewed twigs near hearths, suggesting that families likely shared them, or at least left them lying around like ancient dental Q-tips. A disturbing thought. You rotate the stick, letting a fresh edge scrub across your back molars. The sensation is earthy and slightly astringent. There's even a subtle herbal taste, peppery. If it's bay, slightly bitter. If fig. A philosopher might say it tastes of wisdom. A child might say it tastes like dirt. You land somewhere in between. There's something soothing about it. The repetition, the rhythm. You start thinking of Homeric versus the ones about cleansing the self before battle or ceremony. Surely Achilles brushed before that whole Troy mess, probably with a branch soaked in river water, his golden curls gleaming in the sun as he pondered gingivitis. You joke, of course, but there's truth behind the fantasy. A soldier with tooth pain is a useless soldier, and a speaker at the pnicks with bad breath, social death. So chewing sticks became part of life. They weren't just about cleaning, they were about composure, civility, and in some way, divinity. And here's the quirky fringe detail Some temple records suggest that twigs were chosen on astrologically favorable days, cut only when the moon was in a waxing phase to absorb vital humors from the cosmos. You picture a bearded man squinting at the stars while harvesting twigs for your dental toolkit. It's ridiculous, and you want to believe it's real. You spit a small splinter into your palm and check your smile in the reflective bronze disc hanging from your belt. Cleaner. Not perfect, but better. You'd pass inspection from your most judgmental aunt, maybe even from that sculptor's apprentice you've been eyeing in the Pottery District. You've also heard of couples exchanging twigs as gifts, carved with initials, sometimes soaked in wine, sometimes tied with red wool. Romance, Greek style. Here I got you something that scrapes your tartar. Swoon. You remember a line from a comedy you saw at the Dionysia. His teeth were as clean as a fig picker's stick, used and fragrant. The audience roared. You snorted wine out your nose. And now, standing in the shade, brushing with a twig, you can't help but laugh, softly. Ancient humor has a bite. You wrap up the ritual. The twig's end is worn down, almost pulpy. Some people swallow the fibers for luck, but you're not that brave. You flick it into the dirt, let it join the legacy of forgotten tools that kept Athenian smiles mostly intact. But you do keep the root. Some say if you rub it on your tongue, it wards off evil thoughts. You're not superstitious, except when you are. Your gums feel tingly, maybe from the natural oils, maybe from the friction. You smack your lips. There's a lingering aftertaste, sharp, woody, almost medicinal. You feel cleaner, not modern dental office clean, but ancient under an olive tree clean. That counts. A boy passes by hawking sweet cakes. He glances at your hands and shouts, "Bay!" or "Fig you flash the stick." "Bay." He nods, impressed. "Good for courage," he says, and skips off. You smile, not just because of the compliment, but because despite the absence of toothpaste, floss, or mouthwash, you've just maintained your dental hygiene using a tree branch. And honestly, you feel kind of smug about it. So you tuck another fresh twig into your belt, just in case, and walk into the day with your teeth brushed by the gods themselves, or at least by the tree growing beside their temple. As you step back into your family's courtyard, in the warm haze of afternoon, the sharp scent of vinegar hits your nostrils. Not just from the amphora in the pantry. No, someone's been mixing it with salt again. You glance at the low table near the basin and see the telltale paste, cloudy, thick, and unsettlingly bubbly. Today's toothpaste substitute. A blend of coarse sea salt and strong wine vinegar. It's going to burn. You already know the drill. The salt is there to scrape. The vinegar to sting, sanitize, and maybe scare off any spirits lurking in your molars. You dip a finger into the gritty mixture and brace yourself. The first touch is mild, just a pinch against your incisors. You rub gently, trying not to flinch. But then the vinegar makes its presence known. It seeps into a sore spot near your gum line and zaps you with the fury of Dionysus's hangover. You hiss quietly and continue anyway. Salt and vinegar. Your teeth's frenemy combo. A staple of Greek households, this mixture was beloved for its purifying qualities. Sea salt was abundant and prized for its abrasiveness. It didn't just scrub away food residue, it also symbolically dried out rot, disease, and imbalance. Vinegar, on the other hand, was thought to kill off bad humors, cool internal heat, and cut through buildup. Together, a cleansing tsunami. Historians still argue whether this mixture was actually effective or just another humoral placebo. Some records describe vinegar as being too caustic for daily use, stripping enamel-irritating gums. Others swear it restores the sheen of noble teeth. Hard to argue with that kind of branding. You dab more onto your molars, tilting your head to avoid drooling on your chiton. The salt grinds against a rough patch, and you grimace. If your teeth could talk, they'd scream. But then, strangely, it fades. The burn gives way to a tingly freshness. You swish with a splash of water and run your tongue along your teeth, smooth. For a fleeting second, you feel like a statue, one of those idealized white marble busts, until of course you catch your reflection and see the red spot on your gums where the salt bit too deep. Still, this stuff had fans. Hippocratic texts mention salt vinegar pastes as treatments for sore gums, mouth ulcers, and teeth that wail in the night. That's how they described a toothache, by the way. Poetic, but terrifying. Here's a quirky fringe tidbit. In certain villages, people added crushed snail shells or powdered brick to the salt for extra bite. Some even claimed that mixing in menstrual blood gave the paste magical protection. Others just added thyme or myrrh for the scent. Everyone had their own recipe. Think of it as the artisanal mouthwash of ancient Greece. You once heard your uncle say, "A mouth washed with salt speaks wisely." You're not sure if that's metaphor or just justification for bad breath. Salt wasn't just for teeth, of course. It was used in rituals, cooking, even tax collection. But for your ancestors, it also represented clarity and preservation. Apply it to your teeth, and you weren't just cleaning, you were preserving your very voice. You were refining your tongue to speak truth, poetry, politics. Vinegar, meanwhile, had its own pedigree. Made from sour wine, it was considered a purifier. Doctors used it on wounds. Priests used it in purification rites, and cooks used it on everything. Some even mixed it with honey to create an early version of mouth tonic sting and sweetness combined. That was the rare version you didn't dread. You finish your scrubbing spit again and wince as a bit of salt catches in the corner of your mouth. Still, you can't deny the results. Your breath smells like a well-seasoned salad, but your teeth do feel cleaner. You think back to that time at the oracle when the priestess whispered her prophecy through a vinegary haze. Her mouth smelled like sour wine and rosemary, and yet her voice carried authority. Maybe that was the salt talking, There's also something ritualistic in the mixture's preparation. Some elders insist it must be stirred 7 times counterclockwise while chanting a purification prayer. Others say you should only use salt harvested by hand at sunrise. And vinegar must come from wine you've blessed, or at least not spilled while drunk. And then there's the social factor. You've seen market vendors dipping rags into salt vinegar paste and rubbing down their front teeth before greeting customers. A clean smile, even a slightly reddish one, meant trustworthiness. Meanwhile, a yellow smile, barbarian, or worse, Thracian. You look at your fingertips, red, gritty, shining faintly. You rinse them off in the wash basin and dry them on your tunic hem. You hope no one notices the stain, but even if they do, they'll know what it means. You've done your ritual. You've earned your sparkle. And for just a moment, standing there in the doorway of your home, you wonder, did Socrates ever do this? Did he sit with his elbows on his knees, swiping vinegar across his teeth while ranting about justice? Probably not. But it's fun to imagine. As the sun reaches its peak, you retreat into the cool of the house, your mouth tingling, your gums slightly raw, and your smile, at least by Athenian standards, ready for anything. Afternoon shadows creep across the tiled floor as you duck into the pantry. The heat outside is unbearable now, and you've decided that if your teeth must suffer, at least let it be in the cool dimness of home. You slide aside a basket of figs and unearth a small clay jar tucked behind some dried lentils. Inside clay, earth, what your ancestors charmingly called white dirt. Yes, it's time for the most grounded of ancient Greek dental routines, brushing with the soil of the gods. You scoop out a small pinch. The texture is silky, almost like flour. This isn't just any dirt. It's a fine kaolin-like clay prized for its absorbent and mildly abrasive properties. Soft enough not to destroy your gums, strong enough to pull a bad smell out of your face. You smear some onto your finger, dab a little water on top, and begin to rub. It tastes like chalk, cold and dry with a strange metallic aftertone. Not unpleasant, just primordial, like you've shoved a temple column in your mouth. Clay was used across the Greek world for both external and internal cleansing. It absorbed toxins, cooled inflammation, and according to the philosophers, neutralized the corruptive vapors that emerged from between the teeth. A horrifying image, but compelling. Historians still argue whether the clay used for oral hygiene was sourced from common pits or special clean veins near temples. Some believe clay from sacred grounds like Delphi or Eleusis was thought to carry divine purifying power. One papyrus even refers to it as earth from beneath the feet of the gods. You're not entirely sure where yours came from. Probably a hillside near Thebes. But who's to say a god didn't once nap there? And here's a quirky fringe tidbit. Certain regions sold tiny packets of blessed dirt, supposedly mixed with powdered silver or bits of dried thyme for travelers worried about bad breath on long sea voyages. You remember your cousin once swallowing one by accident and spending a week tasting like limestone and herbs. She claimed it cleansed her soul. Everyone else just avoided her. Back to your mouth. The clay has begun to dry, slightly, pulling at your cheeks. You rinse, and for a brief moment, the taste vanishes, leaving your breath crisp, almost cool, like you just inhaled the side of a marble statue. Some households enhance the clay with added ingredients: crushed mint leaves, myrrh resin, dried citrus peels, anything to offset the taste of, well, dirt. Others used clay as a base and added bone dust or ash for more bite. You once tried that. It felt like chewing gravel while praying to Athena. Never again. But you understand the appeal. Clay feels gentle, soothing. Your gums don't throb. Your enamel doesn't feel like it's been sandblasted. And there's something oddly comforting about cleaning your mouth with the same material used to build homes, sculpt gods, and seal ancient contracts. It connects you. The philosophical types, probably sitting cross-legged in togas somewhere near the Acropolis, would say clay returns the body to balance with the earth. You just know it gets rid of the stale barley taste from lunch. That's enough wisdom for you. There's even a practice among certain islanders of using clay as a drying agent after oil rinses, for instance. Rub on clay, wait a few minutes, rinse, and enjoy the matte finish. Very chic, very pre-modern mouth spa. You reach for the clay again and give your molars one more pass, just to be sure. You've got a gathering later tonight, a dinner with your aunt's neighbor's niece's wedding planner, and you refuse to be the one remembered for garlic breath. As you rinse the final time, the water clouds with the fine dust. You watch it swirl, forming miniature whirlpools before slipping down the drain channel carved into the stone floor. That same clay which once sat beneath your feet now carries yesterday's memories away. You smile again. This time it's wider, not because your teeth are perfect, they aren't, but because they've survived fire salt oil and now dirt. That's resilience. Before you leave, you gather a small amount of the clay into a pouch, just enough for the road. You never know when a fig or anchovy might ambush you mid-conversation. And as you step back into the heat of the day, you feel grounded, literally. There's earth in your breath, on your fingers, and between your teeth. And for once, that's exactly where it belongs. The sun has dipped slightly, casting a softer gold over the rooftops as you retreat to the inner chamber of the house. Someone, probably your cousin, has left the sweet sour smell of donkey milk lingering in the air. You wrinkle your nose and glance at the small ceramic bowl on the side table, thick, slightly warm, and flecked with a drizzle of golden honey. Of course, it's time for the infamous donkey milk and honey dental remedy. You sigh. It's sticky, it's strange, it's absolutely something an ancient Greek would swear by. And you're about to slather it across your teeth. With practiced fingers, you mix the milk and honey together into a semi-fluid goo. It's thick, viscous, and glows faintly in the lamplight. You hesitate. Then you scoop a modest amount and apply it gently to your front teeth, careful not to let too much pool at your gums. The honey adheres instantly. The milk spreads like warm cream. It's sweet, really sweet, but oddly calming, almost like sipping a childhood treat, if your childhood included dubious dental science and a house goat. Donkey milk wasn't just for Cleopatra's baths or poets' metaphors. The Greeks considered it medicinal cooling, soothing cleansing, rich in fats and enzymes. It was praised by Hippocratic physicians for its ability to soften inflamed tissue, especially around the gums. Honey, on the other hand, was nature's golden disinfectant, antibacterial aromatic, and a favorite of both healers and sweet-toothed philosophers. You hold your breath and let the mixture sit. It clings to your teeth like a second skin, sticky but luxurious, like a facial mask for your mouth. Historians still argue whether this combination was intended as a cleaning agent or a post-cleanse balm. Some sources suggest it followed abrasive treatments, bone dust, ash, even salt, to soothe the oral tissues. Others claim it was used on its own as a kind of pre-bedtime dental treat, a honeyed blessing before sleep. One physician's scroll claims this mixture heals the wounds of harsh brushing and awakens the smile for noble speech. A bit dramatic, but also not entirely wrong. Your teeth feel slick, your gums cooler, less agitated. Maybe they are awakening. And here's your quirky tidbit: legend tells of a Pythagorean sect that used only donkey milk to clean their mouths, believing it aligned their vibrations with the order of the cosmos. One inscription even reads, "To eat of honey is divine, to clean with it is celestial." You picture a robed mystic in sandals, swishing milk like it's sacred wine. Of course, practicality remained. Honey masked odors. Donkey milk carried a mild lactic acid that may have helped dissolve buildup. Combined, they softened the mouth's rougher edges and left a faintly sweet aftertaste. Perfect, perhaps, for those long symposia where you needed both charm and stamina. But there were risks. You remember your older brother smearing too much on his teeth before a flute performance? The milk turned slightly rancid under the heat of the oil lamps. His breath, someone later said, smelled like a fermented cheese dream. He hasn't used it since. Still, tonight the air is cool. You won't risk spoilage. And frankly, after clay, ash vinegar, and twigs, your mouth deserves this moment of indulgence. You sit near the window, the sounds of the city softening as the sky dims. The mixture continues to coat your teeth. There's a temptation to lick it off, but you resist. Let it work. Let the ancients' wisdom, or at least their optimism, wash over you. A soft knock at the door. It's your aunt, holding a sprig of rosemary. She nods at your bowl. "You remember the old recipe," she says, smiling. "Good for the spirit. Even better if you don't talk too much afterward." You grin, mouth sealed with honey. Later, you'll rinse gently with warm water and pat your lips dry. Your teeth won't sparkle like polished marble, but they'll feel softer, calmer, as if every cell in your mouth just sighed in relief. And as you prepare for bed, your breath smells faintly of honey and grass. Your smile perhaps a little gentler, a little sweeter, exactly how the gods intended. It's late evening now. Lamps flicker softly in the corners of the room, their flames sending dancing shadows across the stone walls. The day's dust has settled on your skin, and the market's lingering scent of olives and roasted lamb still clings to your tunic. But there's one more step before bed. One final breath ritual passed down from your great-grandmother, whispered like a secret between generations, the resin of the gods. You reach for a tiny alabaster jar, stoppered with wax. It contains a substance both sacred and practical myrrh. Thick brown and crystalline, it smells like ancient temples, forgotten tombs, and the breath of old gods. Tonight, it will also be your final dental defense. You scrape off a small chunk with a bronze pick, crush it between your fingers until it softens into a paste, and smear it lightly across your gums and inner cheeks. There's no sweetness here, only sharpness, bitter, medicinal, almost metallic. Myrrh doesn't pretend to be pleasant. It earns its place. You feel it begin to tingle, seeping into the soft tissue, like 1,000 tiny bees testing your pain tolerance. It stings a little proof, perhaps, that it's working. You suck your teeth slightly and blink back the burn. Why would anyone do this? Because the ancient Greeks believed that myrrh harvested from the hardened sap of the commiphora tree was one of nature's great purifiers, used in funerary rites, religious offerings, and battlefield medicine. It was the antiseptic of the ancient world. And for the mouth, it was everything: deodorizer, disinfectant, painkiller, and spiritual shield. Historians still argue whether its widespread use for oral health was practical or symbolic. Some scrolls emphasize its ability to tighten the breath and guard the voice. Others simply record its role in warding off disease, evil spirits, and rotting of the inner air, whatever that means. And here's your quirky fringe fact. In some rural rituals, newlyweds were expected to chew a ball of myrrh together on their wedding night to cleanse their breath and align their spirits. Romantic, not really. But memorable. Absolutely. You move the resin around your mouth with your tongue. It resists. It sticks. It lingers in the same way an oracle's cryptic prophecy lingers, unwelcome but unavoidable. You breathe out slowly, hoping your breath now carries a note of incense rather than anchovy. But it wasn't just myrrh. Tree resins of many kinds made their way into ancient dental routines. Frankincense, mastic, even pine resin, all were chewed, burned, ground into paste, or pressed into oil. The idea was simple. Where there was scent, there was power. And where there was bitterness, there was healing. You remember a market vendor once chewing mastic until it turned white, then applying it to her teeth with a tiny stick. "It makes the word sweeter," she said with a wink. "You were 8 years old. You didn't understand. You do now." Myrrh, unlike other substances, was often considered holy, reserved for priests, for warriors, for philosophers trying to outlast the night. The idea of using it as a mere breath freshener would have been offensive to some. Yet, here you are, smearing a sacred resin across your molars like some dental high priest. The burning sensation intensifies briefly, then fades. In its place, numbness. And with the numbness, clarity. You can feel your teeth again, not just as bones in your mouth, but as vessels of speech, song, argument. In a society built on rhetoric that mattered, you rinse once lightly, not to remove it, but to settle it. A cool splash of water to fix the blessing in place. And now your breath smells like an altar. There's a kind of reverence to the whole thing. A closing ceremony. Unlike the gritty abrasiveness of ash or the indulgent sweetness of honey, this is austere, stoic, final. It reminds you that your mouth is not just for food and flirtation. It's for legacy. What you say echoes. What you leave behind, whether in poetry or gossip, lives on. Your gums feel tighter. Your lips slightly dry, but your breath clean, sharp, unforgettable. You press your tongue against your front teeth, savoring the final taste of tree and fire. You imagine your ancestors doing the same before trials, before weddings, before war. A resinous pause before the unknown. Then, with a deep breath, you blow out the final lamp, letting the soft smoke curl through your clean mouth like incense through a sanctuary. Your teeth, now dressed in sacred sap, settle in for the night. The night deepens, and silence spreads like warm oil across the courtyard stones. You lie back on a woven mat, arms crossed behind your head, watching a moth flit near the oil lamp. But your mouth, your loyal, weary mouth, is still buzzing faintly from the myrrh. You smile faintly, and then you remember something your grandfather once said. If you want teeth like a god, you must polish them like a warrior sharpens his blade. With that deeply unscientific wisdom in mind, you reach for the small polished stone that sits beside your grooming kit, a gift from a cousin who traveled to Rhodes, smooth on one side, gritty on the other. It's not for shaving or face scraping, it's for your teeth. Tonight, you're going to polish. The Greeks were no strangers to abrasion. In fact, they leaned into it, especially when it came to appearances. A polished tooth was a mark of beauty, refinement, and let's be honest, wealth. If your teeth gleamed, people assumed your mind did too. You dab the corner of the stone with a tiny pinch of powdered pumice, ground volcanic rock from nearby islands like Thera. It sparkles faintly in the lamplight like crushed stars. You mix it with a few drops of water and press it against your front teeth. Grind. It doesn't hurt yet, but it definitely doesn't feel gentle. You drag the gritty surface slowly in tiny circular motions over the enamel. The sound is soft, like sandpaper on marble. You stop periodically to check your progress in a handheld bronze mirror, lips curled back like an overconfident satyr. Pumice was highly prized in ancient dental care. Its fine yet sharp texture made it ideal for removing stains, especially those from wine figs or roasted meats. It was the ancient equivalent of whitening strips minus the peroxide and the corporate branding. Historians still argue whether pumice was used daily or just before special occasions. After all, regular polishing with volcanic glass sounds like a fast track to exposed nerves. But elite Greeks, they didn't care. They wanted shine. And here's your quirky fringe tidbit. Some dancers and actors reportedly mixed powdered pumice with goat fat and lemon juice to create a toothpaste they applied before performances. The fat added gloss. The lemon stung like betrayal. But back to your molars. You run the stone across them with care, switching to the smoother side as you move farther back. It's not about cleaning. At this point, it's about display. You're removing the subtle yellow tinge of today's meals. You're sculpting shine from stone. The gritty paste foams slightly from the pressure and saliva. It tastes like sand and regret. You try not to swallow. A little polishing goes a long way. You remember a merchant who once offered you a 3-grade polish starting with crushed coral, moving to pumice, finishing with powdered marble. You passed. He had 3 teeth total. But here's the thing done right. It works. You rinse with cool water, spit, and inspect. Your teeth gleam faintly in the lamp's flickering light. Not blinding, not divine, but luminous, alive. Of course, there are risks. You once heard a tragic poem about a woman who polished too aggressively and wore her wisdom to the root. Whether that's literal or metaphorical, you're not sure. But the point stands: too much polishing, and the shine costs you your bite. You store the stone carefully, wrapping it in oiled cloth. It's precious, not just because it's rare, but because it's become part of your nightly transformation from mortal to marble bust, one scrub at a time. And let's not forget social standing. A well-polished smile was like a well-oiled beard or a finely embroidered chiton. It spoke volumes before you said a word. In the symposium, a shine meant success. In the agora, it meant reliability. In a wedding portrait, immortality. You settle back onto your mat, rubbing your tongue gently over the smoothness. No rough spots, no residue. Just the faint mineral tang of stone and pride. There's a calm in the ritual. You've taken your mouth through fire, salt, oil, bark, sap, and now stone. It's not just hygiene anymore. It's identity. And as your eyes drift closed, you can almost hear your grandfather's voice again. Polish the teeth, polish the soul. You didn't believe it then. You might believe it now. The morning light returns, sneaking past the shutters like a curious cat brushing softly across your cheek. You yawn, stretch, and taste. Bronze, dust, maybe the ghost of last night's pumice. It's time for the daily refresh, and this time you're not reaching for twigs or ash or oil. Today's weapon is gleaming, deliberate, and ever so slightly threatening, your bronze dental toolkit. You lift the lid of a narrow wooden box tucked beneath your bed mat. Inside, nestled in faded cloth, lie the polished instruments of your oral regimen. Tiny picks, narrow scrapers, and one rather ominous tweezer-like tool, all made of cool bronze. There's even a delicate hook, shaped like a shepherd's crook, rumored to have been designed by some long-dead physician with an obsession for molar hygiene. These aren't mere tools. They're symbols. To own a dental set like this means you've arrived, or at least that you aspire to arrive somewhere respectable. Only the moderately wealthy could afford custom picks and scrapers, and only the most meticulous bothered to use them properly. You pluck out a slim scraper with a flattened edge and bring it to your front teeth. Gently, because you've learned this lesson the hard way, you run the edge along the gum line. A faint scraping sound follows, like papyrus rustling or sand dragged across a tile floor. It's almost satisfying. You peek into the polished mirror disc. A thin line of white residue clings to the blade's edge. You flick it clean. These tools were modeled, some say, after surgical instruments used in battlefield medicine. A philosopher might argue that maintaining your teeth is an act of daily war against decay. A poet might compare the scraper to a chisel sculpting a marble smile. Historians still argue whether dental tools were part of household kits or reserved for physicians. But scrolls found in Olynthus and Delos describe kits owned by women traveling merchants and even retired soldiers. Some included not just picks and tweezers, but instructions, cryptic, poetic phrases like brush the moon's edge and do not stir the sleeping lion at the back. Translation: be gentle with your wisdom teeth. And here's your fringe tidbit for today. One recovered toolkit from a tomb near Corinth included a tiny inscription on the handle of a scraper. It read, "For beauty, not blood," presumably a reminder to avoid digging too deep, or maybe just aspirational branding. You move on to the bronze toothpick. It's long, slightly curved, and highly personal. Sharing toothpicks was considered unhygienic, even scandalous. To use someone else's pick was a faux pas on the level of drinking from their wine cup without permission. Or, worse, uninvited recitation of their favorite Homeric passage. You slide the toothpick carefully between two back molars. A remnant of last night's fig resists, then surrenders. Victory. You exhale through your nose with quiet satisfaction. There's something almost intimate about the entire process. You're in your own head, literally and metaphorically. Focused, precise. This is a solitary ritual not to be rushed. The Greeks saw bodily care as part of ethical life, balance, temperance, harmony. Cleaning your teeth wasn't vanity, it was virtue. And yes, there were dangers. Bronze, while durable, isn't forgiving. One wrong move, and you're bleeding, tasting the tang of iron and shame. You learned this as a child, trying to copy your uncle's technique. He scraped with one hand while declaiming poetry with the other. You slipped. You bled. He never noticed. Now, older and wiser, your movements are slow, controlled. You switch to the third tool, a set of tweezers, not for stray hairs, but for pulling stubborn debris or inspecting tender gum areas. Some also use them to remove broken tooth fragments, though you try not to think about that too much. You recall one horrifying tale from the Stoa. A man tried to remove a piece of olive pit with his bronze hook and ended up pulling half a tooth. They say his scream echoed all the way to the temple of Hephaestus. And yet, the tools endure. They're symbols of status, of knowledge, of readiness. A soldier might sharpen his spear. You sharpen your smile. And as your tongue runs over each cleaned tooth, you feel prepared. Like you could argue with a sophist and win. Like you could flirt across a symposium couch and not worry about what your breath says behind your words. You wrap the tools again carefully, reverently. Even the sound of bronze clinking against cloth feels sacred now. You've used metal forged from the earth to preserve the bones of your face. That's alchemy in its own brutal way. Outside, a rooster calls. Someone is sweeping. The city wakes loud and golden, but you're already 10 steps ahead, armed, armored, and clean. By midday, the sun hangs high and unrepentant above the tiled rooftops. You duck into the cool interior of a shaded colonnade, wiping sweat from your brow. There's a jug of diluted wine waiting on a low table, deep red, slightly tart, and watered down to something between refreshment and mouthwash. And yes, you're about to gargle it. You swirl the jug, once pour a modest cup, and raise it not to drink, but to rinse. Because in ancient Greece, wine wasn't just a beverage. It was medicine, offering status, symbol, and apparently oral cleanser, especially when mixed just right. 1 part wine to 2 parts water, sometimes with a pinch of salt or a handful of herbs. You tilt your head back, swish, and let the mixture bubble around your molars. The sting is immediate. This batch leans young, tart, and tannic, probably from your uncle's private amphora, and there's a sharp acidity that floods your tongue. But it's working. At least you think it is. Your mouth feels cleaner already. The logic was sound by ancient standards. Wine was considered purifying. Red wine had astringent properties, good for toughening the gums and sealing wounds. White wine was gentler, more cleansing, and often mixed with vinegar to enhance its bite. A double dose of cleansing fire, so to speak. Historians still argue whether wine rinsing was a luxury or a necessity. Some say it was common among soldiers who carried flasks of wine not just for drinking, but for sterilizing wounds and mouths. Others suggest it was a habit of the elite, a perfumed ritual of refinement between meals or after public speaking. And then there's the fringe theory. Some mystery cults believe that rinsing the mouth with wine before prayer helped align one's inner voice with the divine. After all, how can you address the gods if your breath reeks of onions? You spit discreetly into a clay basin, a faint splash, a trail of red. Your gums tingle. But let's not ignore the other practice. Urine. Yes, ancient Greeks, particularly those on the fringes of society or influenced by Roman customs, occasionally used aged urine as a mouth rinse. You shudder just thinking about it. The ammonia content, they claimed, whitened the teeth and destroyed foul-smelling humors. You remember the story of a street poet who swore by it. He'd carry a small flask tucked into his belt vintage, he called it, and take a swig before each recitation. The crowd laughed at him until his breath overpowered the first 3 rows. Mainstream texts largely avoid discussing urine-based rinses. It's one of those, we know it happened, but no one brags about it details. And while historians still argue whether it was truly widespread or a fringe folk remedy, you personally draw the line there. Wine, on the other hand, remains respectable. You swirl a second cup, this time adding a crushed mint leaf. It adds freshness, a hint of sweetness, and masks the lingering aftertaste of myrrh and pumice. You gargle with less caution now, letting the mix coat your cheeks and tongue. There's something oddly elegant about it, like performing a toast with no audience. You can almost imagine philosophers doing this between lectures, punctuating Socratic debates with thoughtful mouth rinses. Define justice, but first, a gargle. And here's a fun little detail. Some symposium hosts kept special wine mixes flavored with anise, rosemary, even fennel for post-meal rinsing. Guests would rise from the couches, stretch and cleanse their mouths before more wine and more arguments. The tongue, after all, was your most valuable weapon in Greek society. It made sense to keep it sharp, hydrated, and not soaked in garum. You finish your rinse and set the cup aside. Your mouth feels brighter, sharper, like a lyre string freshly tuned. You pause, then chuckle softly to yourself. Who knew diluted wine and mint could feel like a victory? Then again, in a world where disease, decay, and drama constantly nipped at your heels, a clean mouth was more than hygiene. It was preparation for war, for love, for poetry. And while you've dodged the more questionable trends, looking at you fermented pea, you still respect their place in the strange mosaic of ancient oral care. You step back into the sun, refreshed and slightly tipsy from the ritual. You lick your lips, minty, tangy, alive. Your mouth, it seems, is now ready for anything, even another debate. You return home by late afternoon, sun-dazed and olive-stuffed, when your younger cousin bounds in from the courtyard with a grin and a scroll. It's smeared with fingerprints and olive oil, but the markings are unmistakable Egyptian hieroglyphs, loosely translated into Greek annotations. He says it's from a traveling physician. You raise an eyebrow, and then you see it scribbled in the margins beside a rough diagram of molars to clean the teeth, like the Nile priests. You sit down cross-legged on the cool stone floor, and unroll the parchment carefully. The ancient Egyptians, it turns out, had quite a few things to say about toothpaste. And the Greeks, they listened. You trace the ingredients listed in shaky Greek script: powdered ox hooves, burnt eggshells, ground myrrh, and wait for it, crushed green copper. Yes, metal. Because why merely scrub when you can polish like a sarcophagus? You look to your right. There it is, a small pouch your uncle brought back from Alexandria, filled with a pale green dust that smells faintly of blood and rain, malachite. You'd always assumed it was decorative. Apparently it's meant for your teeth. You scoop a small amount and mix it with a bit of water, just enough to make a paste. The Egyptians, as the scroll notes, believed this combination not only cleaned, but hardened the soul's anchor. A poetic way to say it, preserved what held your words together. You apply it to your teeth cautiously, unsure what to expect. The texture is sandy, the taste metallic like licking an old coin. But it does coat your teeth with surprising ease, spreading like river silt over enamel. This was the bridge between two great cultures, Greek and Egyptian, and nowhere was the fusion more bizarre than in medicine. Many early Greek dental ideas were lifted straight from Egyptian scrolls. The Ebers Papyrus, one of the oldest known medical documents, described toothpaste recipes centuries before Plato ever debated moral absolutes. Historians still argue whether Greek physicians copied Egyptian texts verbatim or adapted them through cultural filters. What's certain is that the Greeks deeply admired Egyptian wisdom, especially when it came to cleanliness. You once heard a temple attendant whisper that Egyptians feared rot more than death. You can believe it. And here's your quirky fringe tidbit. There's a story of an Alexandrian dentist who offered Pharaoh's paste, made from crocodile dung and powdered pearl. It was banned after several cases of vomiting, but for a while it was the talk of the Eastern Mediterranean. You rinse cautiously. The malachite paste leaves a strange sheen on your teeth, a pale green glow in the mirror. You rub your tongue over it, smooth but ominous. But not all of it was unpleasant. The Egyptians also introduced the concept of daily rituals. Morning cleanses, midday rinses, evening balms. Greeks who previously followed a more ad hoc hygiene model began to adopt these structured routines. Even the household slaves were trained to prepare mixtures, some involving incense, others lotus oil or powdered papyrus bark. You glance back at the scroll. One phrase stands out underlined twice. A clean mouth calls the gods by name. Whether it's superstition or metaphor, it strikes you deeply. And in some ways, the Egyptians were ahead of the Greeks. They emphasized not just appearance, but preservation. They believed that teeth carried memory, that decay of the mouth hinted at decay of character. A bold claim, but one that now lingers behind your molars. You think of the blending that's happened. Olive oil meets ox hoof. Myrrh meets copper. Clay meets pearl. Cultures don't just clash, they brush polish and gargle their way into each other's habits. You set the scroll down and rinse again. The malachite is mostly gone, but a slight shimmer remains. You wonder if it's toxic. Then again, you've chewed tree bark scraped with volcanic glass and gargled wine mixed with herbs you couldn't name. You're probably immune to most things by now. As you dry your face with a linen cloth, you feel worldly, as if your smile now carries the wisdom of pyramids and philosophy in equal measure. You thank your cousin with a nod and tuck the scroll into a drawer. You'll copy the recipe later. For now your mouth is fresh, tingling, and vaguely magical. And somewhere, maybe in Alexandria, maybe in Athens, a long-dead dentist would be proud. Evening falls again, cool and blue, as you lean on the edge of your portico, fingers running along your jawline in thought. The taste of copper still lingers faintly, but your teeth feel sturdy, your gums tight. Not just because of powders and paste, but maybe, just maybe because of something divine. Or so the stories go. You glance toward the small family altar, tucked in the corner, where a carved wooden figure of Asclepius, god of medicine, stands draped in red wool. He holds his staff coiled by a serpent, and tonight you consider whether your oral hygiene owes as much to Olympus as it does to ox bones, because in ancient Greece, medicine was never just physical, it was spiritual, symbolic, and sometimes theatrical. Clean teeth, a blessing, a good breath, proof of inner balance, and if anyone could grant both, it was Asclepius. You close your eyes and recite a quiet invocation, the same one your mother taught you as a child. Before big speeches, clear, be my words, bright, be my tongue, clean, be my breath, before the gods. And no, it wasn't just about superstition. The Greeks genuinely believed in divine influence over the body's functions, especially those connected to speech. The mouth was sacred. It conveyed prayers, oaths, legal defenses, epic poetry. If you spoke with foul breath, it wasn't just offensive, it was impious. Historians still argue whether oral rituals to the gods were meant as health treatments or social theater. Did people actually believe that a prayer could cure a toothache? Or was it more about community identity, aligning oneself with cultural ideals of purity and discipline? Either way, there's no denying that temples of Asclepius often included water basins, incense, burners, and herbal poultices used for cleansing not just the body, but the breath. Some temple records even include special fees for mouth restorations, likely conducted by priest-physicians trained in both medicine and ritual. Here's your quirky fringe tidbit. One preserved tablet from Epidaurus details an offering made by a merchant who suffered from halitosis so severe that customers avoided his stall. He sacrificed a goat, prayed to Asclepius, and reportedly received a dream in which he was instructed to chew bay leaves, rub his gums with wool soaked in vinegar, and stop eating raw garlic before sunrise. Practical Yes, divine, you decide. Of course, Asclepius wasn't alone in the oral health pantheon. Apollo, his father, symbolized clarity and light, ideal metaphors for a clear voice and radiant smile. In some coastal regions, fishermen whispered to Apollo before rinsing with seawater, asking for cleansing of the tongue and freshness of the mouth. It wasn't canon theology, but it stuck. Even Hermes, patron of messengers, was occasionally invoked for silver tongues and quick-witted speech, usually after a wine-heavy night left one's breath less than divine. And in women's circles, Hestia, the goddess of the hearth, was praised for keeping the household's breath sweet and the family's mouths clean. Grandmothers especially leaned on her while preparing salt rinses and herbal soaks for their children. You light a small oil lamp before the Asclepian statue, the scent of burnt sage curling through the air. You don't expect a miracle. But there's something grounding about it. After all the scraping and swishing the vinegar and soot, the goat milk and ash, it feels good to close the ritual with stillness. You take one last sip of herbal rinse mint thyme, a hint of rosemary, and breathe deeply. The air cools your throat, tingles your tongue. You can almost feel the echo of temple hymns carried in the wind. And the gods weren't just invoked during sickness. Before speeches, before marriage vows, before public debates, or court appearances, many Greeks whispered requests for a strong voice and clean breath. It wasn't vanity, it was reverence. You recall one inscription from Delphi that reads, "Let the mouth be clean, for what it speaks may bind the soul." A little dramatic, but isn't that the point? In a world where words could start wars, seal fates, or summon spirits, your mouth mattered. You smile not for the mirror, but for yourself, for the gods, for the quiet knowledge that even in this age of gods and monsters, someone somewhere once looked at a tree branch or a lump of clay and thought, I should put that in my mouth and make it holy. You extinguish the lamp with a soft breath. No smoke, no stench, just warmth, just quiet. Your teeth still tingling, your breath fit for an oracle. The moon is climbing now, casting silver across the city like a soft, washed veil. You're lounging on a low bench in the inner courtyard, half listening to the distant clatter of amphorae, when a memory surfaces. Aristotle, standing in his white cloak, chalk in one hand, gesturing wildly with the other, saying something deeply strange about teeth and the brain. Yes, Aristotle and dental theory. You smirk. Leave it to the greatest philosopher of the classical world to say that teeth were not just bones, but cooling outlets for brain vapor. That's right. According to Aristotle's notes, likely scribbled in between lectures on ethics and metaphysics, teeth formed as excess moisture and heat from the brain, condensed and solidified near the mouth. The body, always seeking balance, expelled this buildup in the form of tooth structures. You like to imagine him declaring this with absolute confidence, as though he had personally watched molars emerge from someone's frontal lobe. Historians still argue whether he truly believed it or whether it was a metaphor lost in translation. But in his model, the head was a furnace of thought, the brain a moist, spongy source of wisdom, and teeth, pressure valves. It sounds absurd now, but the ancients saw connections everywhere. The mouth was not an isolated part of the body. It was the echo chamber of the mind, the gateway to logic and rhetoric. And so, Aristotle believed that oral health reflected mental clarity. If your gums were swollen or your breath foul, it suggested imbalance, not just physically, but philosophically. You think back to his other theories, men had more teeth than women. They don't wisdom teeth emerged later in life because the soul took longer to solidify. Poetic and toothache could be cured by calming the brain, useless but comforting. Quirky fringe fact. Some of his followers tried to treat severe toothaches with head compresses, cooling the forehead with damp cloths, believing it would settle the vapor and relieve pressure in the gums. There is even a bizarre mention in a surviving fragment of an Aristotelian commentary where someone recommended holding a polished mirror to the teeth to reflect excess heat away from the skull. You've tried worse. And then there's the contradiction. Despite all his speculations, Aristotle rarely wrote about actual cleaning techniques. No mention of scrapers or twigs or oil, just grand theories about why teeth grew, why they hurt, and what they meant. As if hygiene were beneath his intellect, or perhaps so embedded in daily life that it didn't need comment. But what he did write about was breath, and how it carried the essence of character. The voice, he argued, transmitted not just sound, but soul. He likened the act of speaking to shaping wind within the mouth, which is either brilliant or just a really elaborate way to say words come out of your face. You find yourself playing with the concept. If breath reflects soul and teeth shape breath, then tooth care becomes spiritual maintenance. Each scrape, each rinse, each whispered prayer to Asclepius, isn't that a little like philosophy? Refining the inner world through outer actions. You suddenly remember an odd little encounter at a symposium, a tipsy student reciting Aristotle's dental theory while flossing with a thread from his tunic. It didn't work, but he was very convincing. And while most of Aristotle's dental science has been disproven by modern standards, you can't help but admire the poetry of it. Teeth as messengers of the brain, gums as barometers of thought. A wisdom tooth literally bursting forth when the soul ripens. You reach up and tap a molar thoughtfully. No pressure, no vapor, but maybe, just maybe, a hint of insight. It's easy to mock the ancients with their brain steam and mirror therapy, but at least they cared. They looked at the human body not just as a collection of parts, but as a universe of symbols. A clean mouth wasn't just about avoiding infection. It was about clarity, about presence, about harmony with yourself and the world around you. You stretch your arms, yawn once, and let your jaw relax. Your teeth feel steady, anchored, and in the back of your mind you hear Aristotle murmuring about cooling your thoughts and find yourself smiling. Not because it makes sense, but because it makes you feel like you belong to something older than toothpaste tubes and electric brushes. Something timeless. Something human. The air is cooler now. The stars stitched clearly into the night sky like scattered salt over a deep blue cloth. You're curled near the hearth, not for warmth, but for the comfort of flickering light. In your hands is a cracked leather scroll, part of the Hippocratic corpus, a collection of medical teachings older than most temples you've visited. You unfold it slowly, reverently. Tonight you're reading ancient advice on sore teeth, swollen gums, and other oral agonies. Spoiler, none of it's gentle. The first entry catches your eye. Rub the aching tooth with crushed garlic and onion. Repeat until the rot surrenders or the patient does. Charming. You glance toward the kitchen. There's garlic, there's onion, and there's that little ceramic mortar. Why not? You grind a clove of garlic and a wedge of onion into a pale, pungent paste, then apply it carefully along the gum line with the corner of a linen scrap. Immediately, your mouth protests. A sharp burn shoots across your tongue. Your eyes water. This is not a painkiller. It's an eviction notice. But according to the Hippocratic texts, this burning means success. The goal wasn't just to treat decay. It was to expel the imbalance, heat, phlegm, blood, bile, whatever humor was invading the mouth. The Greeks believed toothaches were symptoms of deeper corruption in the body, often linked to the stomach or brain. Historians still argue whether Hippocrates himself wrote all these remedies, or if they were collected from a variety of early physicians. Either way, there's a running theme: force the body to balance itself, even if it means waging war on your gums. You flip further down the scroll. When the tooth pulses apply, leech to ear canal, pass, rinse mouth with wine heated over pine branch, slightly better. Pack the mouth with wool soaked in vinegar and ash. Seal lips. Pray to Apollo. You've done stranger things today. The most surprising part. These weren't fringe ideas. This was medicine. Doctors trained under the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm, were also instructing patients to chew raw fig sap or bite down on hot coals wrapped in linen. They believed that direct application of heat acid or drying agents could dry out infection. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it just hurt. And here's your quirky tidbit. One surviving papyrus describes a ritual wherein the physician would shout at the infected tooth, literally yell, commands like, "Be gone," rot before applying treatment. A blend of medicine and theater. Sure, but also, oddly, cathartic. You rinse your mouth with warm water, easing the garlic burn. It still stings, but your sinuses are clearer than they've been in weeks. You can't decide if that's healing or just a side effect of near asphyxiation. Another entry catches your eye. Avoid hard-bred figs with seeds and harsh words when the teeth are inflamed. You like that last part, as if arguments could worsen your enamel. The Hippocratic texts also emphasized prevention, daily rinsing, gentle chewing, avoiding extremes of hot and cold, not sleeping with your mouth open. One fragment even suggests singing at dawn to awaken the voice and warm the teeth. A strange idea, but the image of an old philosopher humming in his courtyard, mouth open to the sun, does seem rather lovely. And some advice still holds today. Chew herbs, rest your jaw. Don't grind your teeth when angry. Not everything in the scrolls has aged like fish on a festival day. You close the document, wrap it again in cloth, and place it gently on the shelf. Your mouth aches slightly, but it's a clean, worked-over ache, like the sore feeling after exercise, or confession. As you sip cool water and breathe through your nose, you marvel at how far people were willing to go to understand their own mouths. They studied, they experimented, they suffered, and in doing so, they turned hygiene into knowledge, into ritual, into history. You lie back on the mat tongue, idly checking each tooth, a bit sore, a bit garlic-flavored, but intact. And somewhere out there, the ghost of Hippocrates probably nods in approval, so long as you don't start yelling at your molars. You rise at dawn the next morning to a chorus of doves and the faint scent of roasted barley. As you move past the kitchen, someone's already setting out breakfast, cheese olives, and of course, honey-soaked cakes. You hesitate. You love the sweetness, but you also know the price. Because if there's one thing the ancients feared almost as much as war, it was tooth rot. And nothing brought decay faster than sugar. Well, what passed for sugar? The ancient Greeks didn't have cane sugar, but they were absolutely sweet-toothed. Honey was everywhere, in pastries, in wine, on fruits, and even gods. Help us inside lamb stew. They adored it. They smeared it on figs, baked it into cakes, stirred it into medicinal pastes. But their teeth less thrilled. You sink your teeth into a honey-drenched sesame roll. It's divine. It's sticky. It instantly begins seeping into every crevice between your molars. You chew slowly, imagining your teeth bracing themselves for the assault. You promise them you'll clean up afterward. And here's the historical reality. Decay was common. Despite all the rinses and scrapes and prayers, toothaches plagued even the healthiest citizens, and the sweet stuff was usually to blame. Historians still argue whether diet or technique played the larger role in ancient dental disease. Greek diets were healthy by modern standards, lots of grains, olives, fish, fruit, but frequent honey use combined with coarse bread likely wore enamel down fast. Add a lack of fluoride and the occasional slug of vinegar, and you've got a mouthful of trouble. The worst offenders, figs. Those chewy, seed-filled bombs of sugar and grit. Delicious, yes, but a tooth's nightmare. You once heard a doctor joke that figs were Apollo's revenge for mankind's arrogance. And here's a quirky tidbit. One ancient text advises sucking on green olive pits to push the sweetness down. The idea being that olives bitter and fibrous could cleanse the palate and massage the gums after honey. Whether it worked or not, unclear, but it might explain why so many dessert platters were served with olives. Decay didn't just mean pain, it meant shame. A rotten smile was a sign of imbalance, indulgence, even moral failure. Many believed that those with yellow or missing teeth had too much internal heat or ate too many rich foods. In public, these people were often mocked or quietly avoided during symposia. After all, if someone can't manage their mouth, how can they manage their household? You think of your neighbor, the one missing his front tooth, who tried to sell you sea salt last week. He said it fell out while biting into a honey cake. You smiled politely. But deep down, you made a note, go easy on the sweets. And it wasn't just about rot. Ancient Greeks believed that bad breath stemmed from poor digestion. So, if your mouth reeked after dessert, they assumed your entire insides were rotting. That's a social death sentence, especially in a society obsessed with speech debate and public image. To fight back, households had remedies. Post-meal rinses with wine or vinegar, chewing sticks of mastic or anise, sucking on rosemary sprigs or lemon peels. Some even burned aromatic herbs and inhaled through the mouth, like mouth incense, if you will. But perhaps the most bizarre post-dessert ritual was this rubbing teeth with ash made from burnt barley cakes. You've tried it once. It felt symbolic, like apologizing directly to your molars. And yet, despite the danger, despite the rot, you keep eating honey. Everyone does. Because even in ancient times, pleasure sometimes outranked logic. You finish your cake, lick the stickiness from your fingers, and head to the basin. Already your mouth feels too sweet, too heavy. You dip your chewing twig in salt water and begin brushing. The taste cuts through the sugar immediately. You breathe a little easier. Your tongue finds no sharp edges, no cracks. You sigh with relief. Still, you can't help but wonder how many philosophers lost teeth to honey. Did Socrates ever wince mid-argument because of a fig seed stuck in his gums? Did Plato write the Republic while nursing a cavity? It's a strangely comforting thought. You spit, rinse, and pat your mouth dry. No more sweets until sunset, maybe. You glance at your reflection in the polished bronze. Your smile holds, for now. The sun is high once more, the city humming with life, vendors shouting sandals, slapping against marble children, chasing each other between columns. You sit in the shade of a fig tree, legs folded beneath you, parchment in your lap, trying to decipher the recipe, scrawled in faded ink, to make the mouth both fragrant and white. Combine goat fat, ash mint oil, and liquid from frogs. You blink. You read it again. Still frogs. Household recipes for toothpaste. It turns out we're often a family affair. Passed from aunt to niece, healer to apprentice, these scrolls were filled with remedies, not found in temples or taught in philosophical schools. No divine incantations, no lectures on humors, just trial and error, often guided by smell and taste. You unroll a second, more coherent scroll. Boil goat fat until soft. Mix with equal parts ash and ground bay leaves. Add oil of mint or thyme. Store in clay jar, away from direct heat. Use before sun rises. Better. These domestic concoctions were the backbone of ancient Greek hygiene. Customizable, economical, and, depending on the household, either life-saving or jaw-cracking. You remember your grandmother bending over the hearth, muttering about ratios, while crushing bone with the heel of a sandal. Her mixture included myrrh and a mysterious blue powder no one dared question. She had all her teeth when she died at 79. That was legend-worthy in your family. Historians still argue whether these homemade blends were widespread or reserved for the particularly fastidious. Some believe most Greeks relied on simpler methods, salt twigs, vinegar. Others point to archaeological evidence of carefully stored pastes and labeled jars, suggesting a robust tradition of home-formulated dental science. And here's your fringe tidbit, a recently translated household ledger from a merchant's wife listed her favorite recipe for toothpaste as crushed oyster shell, egg, yolk, river, silt, and 1 dram of donkey milk whisked until pale like moonlight. The final note, useful before a conversation with in-laws. Back to your recipe. You decide to skip the frogs. Instead, you combine goat fat, rendered earlier, and slightly smoky, with ground bay leaf ash and mint oil. The paste forms slowly thickening into something between balm and salve. You dip your finger in. It's cool, fragrant, and vaguely herbal. You rub it across your molars. Surprisingly, it works. It softens on contact, clings to enamel like a protective sheath, and the mint oil lifts the scent instantly. You breathe out. No staleness, no cloying aftertaste, just clean air. It's no modern fluoride gel, but it's honest and crafted. You made it. That matters. You think about the differences between these home recipes and what physicians prescribed. One focused on theory, the other on results. One cited humors, the other gut instinct, but both pursued the same goal: preservation of the voice defense, of the body pride in one's breath. Some households even treated toothpaste like perfume, tailoring it to moods or events. Sage and myrrh for solemn days, lemon and barley ash for light-hearted ones, a blend of thyme and anise before romantic encounters. If you were lucky, someone in your family had a good nose. And then there were seasonal recipes, winter pastes, warming and thick, summer rinses cooling and light. One scroll describes a spring blend made with mashed grape skins, mint, and dried rose petals. Used not only for brushing, but dabbed behind the ears for good measure. You pause, scoop a small portion of your mixture into a miniature ceramic pot, and press a cork stopper in place. You've made enough for a few days. Tomorrow you'll see how it holds up in the midday heat. You look again at the original scroll frog juice and all. You can't help but laugh. Somewhere, someone swore by that mixture. Maybe it worked. Maybe it didn't. But the spirit behind it, the will to preserve the smile, to protect the mouth, to feel clean in a dusty, olive-oiled world, feels universal. You lean back, tongue sliding across your teeth, smooth, herbal, minty. The children nearby are laughing. Someone is baking bread. You catch the scent of thyme and consider adding it to your next batch. Your great-aunt used to say, "A wise woman makes her own paste." You used to roll your eyes. Now you smile. The kind of smile that smells of bay leaves and old secrets. You're back in the courtyard again. The breeze tugging gently at your tunic, the scent of clay and olive wood in the air. A bowl of water rests beside you, untouched. Your jaw aches just a little and you know what's coming. It's time for what every ancient Greek dreaded, feared, and whispered about in the quiet corners of the symposium, a dental emergency. You run your tongue along your back molar. It throbs. It wasn't there this morning. Maybe it was the honey cakes. Maybe it was yesterday's pumice polish. Maybe the gods are punishing you for skipping the frog-based paste. Whatever the cause, it's here now. There's no escaping it. Sometimes teeth must come out. You retrieve the small bronze hook from your household's medicine box. Not a true dentist's tool, but close enough. You feel your pulse rise. Because tooth extraction in ancient Greece was nothing short of gladiatorial. No anesthesia. No sedation. Just strength, speed, and someone willing to hold your head still. You call your cousin. She's 12, grinning and far too enthusiastic about the assignment. She kneels beside you, knees on either side of your shoulders, pressing down with both hands. You breathe in through your nose, out through your teeth, and then you begin. The hook slips beneath the gum line with a practiced slide. You feel it catch. You twist. The pressure builds. A sudden crack not from the hook, but from inside your jaw. The pain is white hot, immediate, absolute. Your cousin cheers. You do not. The tooth comes free. You drop it into the bowl. A sliver of red clouds the water. Your entire mouth pulses with the rhythm of a war drum. You lie back on the stone floor, breathless eyes closed, heart pounding. Welcome to ancient dentistry. Historians still argue whether dental extractions were done by trained practitioners or just whoever had the guts to try. There's evidence of surgical instruments, forceps, and long tweezers found in physicians' kits from Athens to Alexandria. But there are just as many stories of grandmothers performing extractions with fish hooks, fireplace tongs, or even bare fingers. One quirky tidbit from a village near Corinth: a traveling tooth puller used music to calm patients, playing a lyre while he twisted the tooth free. He also offered a free rinse of date wine afterward. His nickname was the Singing Wrench. You're not so lucky. No music, no wine, just the satisfaction of survival. Your cousin offers a rag soaked in vinegar. You bite down hard. It stings, but it stops the bleeding. You don't cry. Much. And yet there's pride here. You endured it. You did what generations before you have done, pulled pain from your mouth with nothing but bronze and willpower. You are now officially part of the Oral History Club. Tooth loss was common, especially by your 30s. In funerary remains from the period, archaeologists often find jaws with multiple gaps. The causes: infection, diet, poor hygiene, or perhaps most damningly, those delicious fig seeds again. But loss didn't mean defeat. The Greeks were practical. They adjusted. Soft foods, rinses, chewing twigs instead of scrapers, and in some rare inventive cases, rudimentary prosthetics. Yes, that's right, ancient dentures. Some were made from carved ivory, others from human teeth, wired into place with fine silver. There's even a controversial fragment of a medical scroll suggesting the use of pig teeth, filed down and glued in with tree resin. Imagine smiling through that. Of course, most didn't bother. They simply accepted their gaps, adapted their diets, and leaned into the wisdom that supposedly came with a toothless mouth. You rinse, gently spit pink, and take another deep breath. The pain is fading, a dull throb now. Your cousin's still watching you like a conquering hero. You give her a tired nod. Some households believe that burying a lost tooth beneath the threshold of the house protected the home from illness. Others said to throw it into a fire while reciting the names of the muses to ensure clear speech in the future. You wrap the tooth in a scrap of linen. You haven't decided what to do with it yet. For now, it's a trophy. Later tonight, you'll apply a paste of crushed myrrh and fig resin to soothe the gum. You'll sip warm wine, rest your jaw, and maybe tell the story with a little more drama than necessary. Because in ancient Greece, a missing tooth wasn't shameful. It was heroic. It meant you had lived, you had eaten, you had laughed, you had quite literally bitten into life. And tonight, even with one less molar, your smile is still strong, still present, still yours. The sky darkens once again, that deep indigo curtain drawn slowly across the city. The lamps are lit, casting long golden reflections across polished stone floors. You sit quietly now, sipping warm water, infused with thyme and fig leaves, your jaw still tender, your breath steady. And as you breathe, you start to wonder about all the things that passed through your mouth today. Food stories, hair pain. You run your tongue over your remaining teeth and feel their shapes, some worn smooth, some a little crooked, one or two chipped from long-forgotten incidents. And with the ache of your freshly extracted molar still pulsing softly, your thoughts turn inward. Because now you begin to think not just of how the Greeks cleaned their teeth, but how those teeth shaped their lives. Tooth decay didn't just hurt, it disrupted everything. It meant missed speeches, shorter prayers, interrupted court cases. Pain in your mouth meant silence. And in a culture built on conversation, oratory, philosophy, and debate, silence was social death. Greeks feared toothaches the way they feared losing their voice, because they knew that the ability to speak clearly, confidently, without flinching was the very foundation of honor, business, persuasion, and art. That's why so much care was given to the mouth, not just brushing or scraping, but controlling diet, balancing humors, strengthening breath. The rituals weren't just hygienic, they were sacred, performative, and essential. Historians still argue whether ancient Greeks truly understood the mechanics of oral disease. They certainly didn't know about bacteria, but they knew patterns, that certain foods caused problems, that certain smells warned of sickness, that certain habits, like rinsing after every meal, seemed to fend off the rot. And here's your quirky fringe fact of the day. In one fragment of an Athenian comedy, a character is described as having the breath of a Spartan and the teeth of a Thracian. It's an insult, the implication that his breath is brutal and his smile uncultured. Even in humor, dental presentation mattered. You glance at your clay cup, the herbal water nearly gone. The fig leaf bitterness lingers on your tongue, a strangely comforting taste. It reminds you of early childhood, when your grandmother would boil fig sap for rinses, swearing it healed everything from sore gums to sour moods. She wasn't wrong. Diet was in many ways the foundation of Greek dental health. Most people didn't eat meat daily, more often fish, legumes, grains, but bread was coarse, often filled with tiny bits of grit from millstones. Over time, that wore down enamel. So did chewing olives, their pits often forgotten inside. Add wine vinegar, the occasional sweet, and you had a perfect storm of decay. But diet wasn't just about damage. Certain foods were believed to protect the teeth. Celery, for example, was thought to strengthen the gums. Raw fennel seeds kept the mouth cool and refreshed. Apple-like quince fruits, when eaten, slowly swept the mouth clean, as one writer put it. You picture yourself eating with more intention, slowly, thoughtfully, chewing for clarity, as much as for hunger. One surviving household document even outlines an entire weekly plan for oral care tailored to meals: ash after cheese vinegar, after fish oil, after figs, clay on feast days. It's less of a dental schedule and more of a lifestyle. And it worked, at least somewhat. The remains of many ancient Greeks show surprising dental resilience. Yes, there were extractions and decay, but there was also evidence of long-term care, even repair. Some skulls show wear, consistent with habitual brushing. Others display smooth, rounded tooth surfaces, suggesting lifelong use of twigs or soft scrapers. You touch your jaw. Again, the pain has dulled. It's no longer sharp, just a quiet throb, like a heartbeat in your mouth. And in that rhythm, you feel gratitude, not just for survival, but for all the quiet knowledge passed through generations, the recipes, the rituals, the warnings, the whispers. Tomorrow you'll eat more slowly, rinse more gently, choose figs with fewer seeds. But tonight you smile. Not wide your jaw, won't allow it, but contentedly. Because your breath is clean, your teeth are present, and your place in this long, strange lineage of oral caretakers is secure. In your own quiet way, you've honored the mouth, preserved the instrument of philosophy, of prayer, of laughter, and in doing so, you've stepped a little closer to what the ancients believed was true harmony between breath and body, between word and will. The final light of the day vanishes behind the rooftops, replaced by the silver glow of the moon. Cicadas hum softly beyond the courtyard walls. A gentle breeze rustles the fig leaves overhead, and you lie flat on your woven mat, hands resting over your stomach, jaw, slack mouth, slightly open. Not in pain, not in effort, just peace. Your mouth, though tender, is clean. You've scrubbed it with twigs, soothed it with oil, burned it with salt, and numbed it with tree resin. You've gargled wine, survived tooth extraction, crushed clay between your molars, and uttered prayers to Asclepius under your breath. And now, here you are, in silence. The rituals may have felt strange. Some were uncomfortable, some downright absurd, but all of them shared a purpose to preserve not just teeth, but dignity. A clean mouth meant you were ready for conversation, for prayer, for argument, for poetry. You remember something a street musician said once, tuning his lyre just outside the agora. The gods don't hear your voice. They hear your breath. He wasn't wrong, because in ancient Greece, the breath carried more than air. It carried identity, spirit, reputation. A foul mouth meant something was wrong, not just physically, but cosmically. That's why so much effort, so much creativity was poured into the humble act of cleaning the teeth. Historians still argue whether this devotion to oral care was practical, ritualistic, or philosophical. But to the Greeks, the distinction hardly mattered. Health was virtue. Cleanliness was order. The mouth, the bridge between inside and outside, was the keeper of truth and worthy of reverence. And here's your final fringe tidbit. A fragment from a lost tragedian suggests that heroes were judged not by their weapons, but by the scent of their words. He spoke like sandalwood, his teeth white as prophecy. A strange line, but one you understand now intimately. You inhale deeply. The air smells of olive oil, mint, and fading smoke. You exhale slowly, feeling the tension leave your chest. Your gums ache slightly, but they do not bleed. Your breath is soft and warm. You taste nothing but time. It's over now. You've survived a day in ancient Greece's dental world. You've rinsed, scraped, prayed, pulled, and polished. You've carried centuries of wisdom behind your lips And now, in the stillness of night, you release it. You close your eyes. Your teeth are clean. Your breath is calm. Your voice, should you need it, is ready. Let it all go now. The burn of the vinegar, the sting of the salt, the pressure of the bronze hook, it's all drifting away. Your mouth no longer throbs. It hums softly like a cooling forge after the smith is gone. The night is quiet. The fig trees sway just enough to make a soft, rustling sound like parchment pages turning themselves. Somewhere far off a dog barks, once then falls silent. The stars above are steady watching. Your jaw relaxes. Your shoulders settle into the mat. There's no need to hold anything anymore. Not tension, not breath, not thought. Let the rituals fade like dream mist. Let the taste of clay and honey dissolve into sleep. You've done enough. Tonight there will be no pain, no scraping, no urgent remedies, just rest. In this stillness, the ancients would say, healing begins. The breath becomes gentle. The pulse softens. The mouth, having worked all day to speak, to chew, to cleanse, may finally be still. You are safe. You are clean. You are whole. Let yourself drift past temples, past baths, past oil lamps and bronze mirrors. Let the old words fade into the shadows. Let the scent of mint and myrrh carry you beyond even the gods' reach. There's nothing left to do. Sleep now, and in the morning, when you wake, the world will be a little newer, your smile a little stronger, your breath like a whisper from history itself.